A gang consisting of 34 people broke into the vault of the Brazilian Central Bank and stole $80 million, making this operation the largest bank robbery in Brazil's history. The strange thing is that the central bank's vault was equipped with the highest security systems, such as surveillance cameras, thermal sensors, and advanced alarms. On the morning of Monday, August 8, 2005, Brazil was shaken by shocking news, as the Brazilian Federal Police received a report about a robbery at the central bank in Fortaleza. When the Federal Police heard this news, they went into a state of confusion because the central bank was the most secure in the country, and it was impossible for it to be robbed. When the police officers arrived at the bank, they were informed that the theft had occurred in the basement of the bank, which is the place that contains the money vaults. As we mentioned, the news spread on Monday, which means it was after the weekend, when the bank employees returned to work as usual, and were shocked to discover the theft that occurred during their absence. The thieves entered the bank with great caution and precision and headed directly to the basement where the money was stored. They were surprised to find an open hole in the ground that seemed to lead to a deep underground tunnel. The strange thing is that the hole was extremely narrow, and the police knew it was impossible to enter it. The first thing the investigators asked about was the amount of money stolen, and the bank employees replied that they did not have an exact number, but they estimated that the amount was more than 100 million Brazilian reals. However, after calculations and auditing, they discovered that the amount was 164 million reals, which is approximately $80 million. This was a huge amount. The police were puzzled as they sat looking at the hole. In a moment of thought, one of the thin investigators suggested entering the hole to see what was inside because they had difficulty getting into it. The mission was fraught with risks, especially with the warnings issued by another officer who pointed out that the thieves might have left bombs inside the tunnel, or that they might still be there and thus could be armed. However, the brave officer named Enya Subra insisted on entering the hole despite all the warnings. Enya entered the hole without hesitation and crawled through the dark tunnel. The tunnel was supported by wooden planks with ventilation pipes, fans, and lights still working. Enya began to feel something strange as he started to believe that the thieves were still at the end of the tunnel or perhaps armed. Despite his fear of taking risks, he continued to crawl very slowly to avoid falling into a trap that the thieves might have left or perhaps a planted bomb. He was very cautious as he continued to crawl through the tunnel, which was about 70 meters long, for a full hour, despite his fear and constant anticipation. Finally, he reached the end of the tunnel, where he found a ladder leading upwards. At this moment, his heart hesitated, but he had no choice but to climb. He carried his weapon and climbed the ladder. Enya expected any surprise, so he prepared for any potential danger. He opened the manual tunnel cover and began looking right and left, finding any trace of the thieves. The place seemed empty, as if no one had been there. There was white powder covering all the surfaces. This powder is used to cover fingerprints. The place was in complete chaos, turned upside down, with things scattered in every corner, trash, clothes, and tools. All the windows were covered with wooden boards. Enya began to carefully search the place and confirmed that no one was there, and there were no traces of the stolen money. However, he discovered a small room filled with sandbags. The sandbags were supposed to be the sand extracted from the tunnel. Then Enya followed the tunnel traces until he reached the roof of the house and discovered that it was very close to the bank, separated by a distance of no more than 70 meters. He decided to contact his colleagues and informed them of his location, explaining that the house he was standing on was at the entrance of the tunnel and was painted green during the robbery. It was actually a front for a company selling artificial grass. This is how the full story of this massive theft began in that house. This news appeared in all the newspapers and television stations. Even foreign press covered the event. Imagine that journalists surrounded the house as soon as it was discovered by the police. As you can see, this is a real picture of the hole from inside the house. And this is a picture of the tunnel showing the underground path. And it is clear that it took time and money to carry out this operation, as the police examined all the crime scenes from the house to the bank vault and every small detail that might determine how the thieves managed to bypass all the complex security systems despite the difficulty of detection. The police immediately noticed that there were many similarities between this operation and other thefts that occurred a year ago in the city of São Paulo, a city known for robberies carried out by various gangs. The police came to the idea that there is a connection between the two operations and that some of the perpetrators of the first operation must have been partners in the second operation. It turned out that the thieves started by renting the house located near the bank, painted it green, and officially registered the company as a business for selling artificial grass, which was a good cover for the sand and soil extracted from the house during the digging. As for the tunnel, they cut a part of the floor and cleverly covered it to look like a carpet. In case of an emergency, for example, if someone entered unexpectedly, they would immediately cover the hole. The tunnel was approximately 73 meters long, and the gang dug it using simple hand tools like shovels and pickaxes to minimize the loud noise that might attract attention. They were putting the sand and soil into bags, and they would take it up to the surface. But digging alone was not enough. They covered the entire tunnel, using approximately 900 wooden and steel panels to support it. They also used air pipes and fans running at full capacity to ensure the tunnel was ventilated, and the lights were continuously on, to provide a sense of comfort inside the dark passages, which is usually used in every tunnel. But this tunnel is different from any other tunnel, as the thieves installed a water pipe and a telephone line. The water was used for work and also to provide drinking water during their hard work. As for the telephone line, it was a means to maintain communication between the people in the tunnel and those who were above in the house. They coordinated the work based on strict rotation among the thieves, with 7 people working each shift, and the work continued non-stop, both day and night. But the biggest problem they faced was the soil. A small truck would come every day to take the bags of soil and sand extracted from the tunnel. When they took out the bags, people in the neighborhood noticed. The neighborhood was small, and the truck appeared every day, carrying a large number of bags, which attracted people's attention and raised their suspicions, prompting several questions about what was happening behind closed doors. The thieves felt that this might cause them a problem, so they made a smart decision. Instead of openly moving the bags of soil, they decided to store them inside the house itself. The rooms in the house were filled with bags of soil, so the rooms were closed one by one until the house was full. Then they started pouring the bags of soil in the backyard of the house in an attempt to level the ground and make it look as if it had risen over time. The tunnel that the thieves dug underground was almost straight, but it had a small curve in one area to avoid hitting the sewage pipe. Then the tunnel continued its steady direction until it reached below the bank's vault. The central bank's vault was very distinctive, as it contained specialized equipment used by the bank's employees. One of these pieces of equipment, it was a huge crane, that orange machine as you see in this picture. This machine is used to lift and move the large money boxes found in the vault. As for the grey columns, they were supports for this crane. Bank employees usually work all day lifting and moving boxes from one place to another using this heavy machine, as each box weighs more than half a ton, which explains the necessity of having the crane in the right place to ensure efficient transport. At the end of each day, the employees would leave the crane in its place when they finished their work. But what happened on Friday was very strange. Before the employees closed the bank and left, the crane had been placed next to the spot where the thieves were digging their final exit for their tunnel. The location of the crane was very precise, placed carefully in a spot that completely blocked the view from the surveillance cameras installed in the basement, which raised suspicions among the investigators. They wondered how the crane was placed in this exact spot. Was it just an ordinary action by a careless employee, or was there a premeditated plan? They began to think deeply about whether one of the bank employees had colluded with the gang to leave the crane in this specific place to hide the camera. Another thing that helped the thieves execute their theft was the grey steel columns that extended along the wall. The boxes were not placed directly against the wall, leaving a small gap that turned into a secret passage for the thieves, despite the narrowness of the passage which did not exceed its width. Only 6 centimeters. It became like a secret passage for them, because all the thieves were thin, which also made the gap narrow, and they were able to pass through this narrow passage with ease. And in this way, they were able to sneak in without being seen, either by surveillance cameras or the eyes of the guards. The surveillance cameras in the vault were small in size, and there were only 6 cameras dedicated to covering all the angles. However, despite this coverage, there were some blind spots that the cameras did not cover, especially between the wall and the boxes. This was one of the security loopholes, which the thieves knew how to exploit. In addition, the thieves used deception to cover the hole. They had placed the crane in front of the hole with a cart, covered by a wooden plank on it. This arrangement was intended to ensure that the surveillance cameras would not capture the hole or any unusual movement around it. And when they considered all security possibilities, they found that the other security system, the thermal sensors, would not be able to detect them either. The thermal sensors were supposed to be placed on the walls, but they were installed on the ceiling instead, and the ceiling was relatively high. which made it unable to cover most areas in the vault. The thieves were aware of this information beforehand, as they had confidential information that was not supposed to be known by anyone except the guards and employees at the bank. The police investigators relied on this information to form a hypothesis about what happened that day. According to the investigations, the officers claimed that the thieves entered the vault for the first time between 6 o'clock in the evening and 7 o'clock in the evening on Friday, which is the last hour before the bank closes its doors. At that hour, the employees had started closing the vault in preparation to leave the bank, which means that working hours had not yet ended, and the sensors were programmed to activate after 7 o'clock in the evening. For this reason, the officers claimed that the thieves entered the vault between 6 o'clock in the evening and 7 o'clock in the evening, a short period of time when the employees had closed the vault and were about to leave, and the sensors were not yet operational. The thieves entered the vault and set it up the way they wanted. They blocked the view of the hole. Then they checked the corridors and other areas. After the theft was discovered at the Brazilian Central Bank, the police immediately began investigations. Their first step was to examine the surveillance cameras and review the bank's entry and exit records. They tried to identify any moment when the cameras might have captured unusual footage, such as suspicious movements or any details that might indicate the involvement of someone inside the bank. Then they began questioning the employees and guards, as it was clear that one or more of them might have been complicit in the complex operation. The evidence indicated that these thieves were fully aware of the bank's security systems, which led investigators to believe there was internal collusion from one of the workers. The investigations continued, and the investigators began trying to identify potential suspects, focusing on the people who were at work during the days leading up to the robbery. But it wasn't easy. The evidence indicated that the plan was executed with great precision by the thieves, making it complicated to identify the suspects. As part of the investigations, the detectives went to the house rented by the thieves, where they had set up a company to sell artificial grass to disguise their activities. When the business license they obtained was verified, it turned out to be registered under the name of a person called Paulo Sergio. This man was suspicious because he was wearing a hat in his ID photo, which was unusual for the police, making it more difficult for them to identify him. The investigators were puzzled about how the Minister of Commerce approved such a photo, even suspecting that he might have bribed someone to facilitate obtaining this license. Then the police questioned the neighbors about Paulo Sergio, the owner of the company. The neighbors confirmed that Paulo was a nice and very sociable person who treated everyone well. This friendly image was part of the strategy used by the thieves to divert suspicion from them. As it turned out, that Paulo was astonishingly deceitful, because he created an excellent social relationship with the neighbors that helped him keep his criminal activities secret. As the investigations progressed, the investigators continued to follow other leads in the hope of uncovering additional details that would lead them to the real suspects. As the case became more complex, the police moved to investigate car and truck dealerships, as they knew that the stolen amount of money weighed 3.5 tons. They quickly concluded that these thieves would not be able to move this large amount of money without having heavy transportation means like cars or trucks. While searching the records of car and truck sales, investigators discovered that a car dealership had sold a number of trucks for cash, and the trucks were valued at 1 million reals. The buyer was a man named Jose Charles. He is someone who owns a shipping company. And usually, the owner of a shipping company can buy trucks. But the strange thing is that he bought all the trucks with cash payment. Such deals are usually done through bank transactions. This prompted the police to conduct a subsidiary investigation with Charles to find out if he and his company were connected to the theft. When the police contacted the company, they were surprised when the secretary told them that Charles, the manager himself, traveled with the truck driver last Sunday. She told them that they had an urgent task to deliver a shipment to São Paulo. As soon as the officers heard the name São Paulo, the course of the investigation changed completely, because the investigators had learned that this shipping operation was linked to the central bank robbery, because they suspected that most of the thieves belonged to São Paulo. What increased these suspicions was a major theft that occurred in the same city a year before the central bank operation, specifically in the year 2004. The theft was carried out by thieves using the same method as the perpetrators of the central bank robbery, by digging a tunnel underground to steal money from the bank. The theft in São Paulo used the same precise method, including underground digging and bypassing the bank's security systems. The officers believed that there was a close connection between the thefts in São Paulo and the central bank robbery, and that the same gang or some of its members might have planned and executed similar operations in both cities. But what made the officers more suspicious of Jose Charles being connected to the theft was that he personally traveled with the truck driver to São Paulo for a simple shipment. This is very strange for the police, because such ordinary shipments are usually delivered by drivers under the supervision of managers or company representatives. Therefore, they became almost certain that he was on his way to transport the stolen money, or at least part of it. With the investigations ongoing, the police managed to find the truck, which was a car carrier. The shipment consisted of several cars, and the truck was on its way to São Paulo, which is about 3,000 kilometers from the city of Fortaleza, where the central bank is located. The road was long, so the journey was expected to take several days. Then the federal police received information that the truck was currently in a city called Belo Horizonte, a city located between Fortaleza and São Paulo. Immediately, a group of officers was sent by helicopter to the city, and upon landing, the commander received a call from the local police informing him that the truck had stopped at one of the police stations on the highway. The truck stopped at the police station by itself before the investigators arrived. Here, the truck driver began to ask himself several questions about the situation around him. But he was hesitant to ask any questions to Charles, because he was just an ordinary driver, and his superiors had ordered him to carry out an urgent task. However, the driver began to feel increasingly suspicious, sensing that there was something unusual about this trip, especially with the frequent stops and the use of public phones instead of Charles's private phones. At one of the stops, when they halted, the driver was away from the truck for a short while, and when he returned, he discovered that Charles had disappeared for several minutes. At that moment, The driver began to suspect that something illegal was happening, and that he might be part of larger networks, but he still did not know the extent of his involvement in this matter. While the driver continued his journey, he began to notice that Charles was acting more strangely and was asking him to stop at distant stations, which increased his suspicions. In the end, the driver arrived at the police station in Belo Horizonte. The driver realized that he had uncovered something bigger than just a regular transport operation. When the driver connected the presence of the cars in the truck and the money inside them with the central bank robberies that have been widely covered in the media, he decided to stop at the first police station on the road. The driver thought that these cars must be filled with stolen money, and as soon as he arrived at the police station, they were met by security forces with their weapons, where the driver and Charles were arrested and taken for questioning. Moments later, the federal police arrived to take over the case. While the police were checking the contents of the cars, the money hidden inside, estimated at about 6 million reals, was extracted. Although this amount was not large compared to the full stolen amount, which is 164 million reals, its presence was definitive proof of their involvement in the theft. During the investigations, the police discovered that Charles was the brother of Marco Ruggiero, the person suspected of being one of the drug trafficking leaders in São Paulo. As the investigations continued, the investigators discovered more connections. That link Charles and his family to massive criminal operations shaking the city. It became clear that Charles was not the mastermind of the theft, but was considered only an assistant, and his role was limited to transportation, the truck, and other logistical tasks. In other words, he was not among those who were in the house, or those who dug the tunnel or robbed the bank. He said he did not know most of the identities of the other thieves. He also confirmed that each person took their share of the money, and that he was only tasked with transporting his share and his brother Marco's share, which amounts to 6 million reals, the same amount they found inside the cars. Charles cooperated with the police and told them everything he knew. He said the number of thieves was 34 people, and he did not recognize any of them except his brother. He saw these people frequently but did not know their names, and his brother was the coordinator among the thieves. He is also the leader who managed the entire robbery operation. When the investigators showed Charles several photos of the suspected criminals to identify some of his brother's friends, Charles was able to recognize some gang members and said he had seen them before. These pictures and names were of the gang members who were identified. Among them were Charles and his brother Marco as well. Among them was Pablo, the man wearing the beanie hat, who was the owner of the company. And of course, Pablo was a fake name. Then came Alimo, the notorious criminal known in Fortaleza, whose name was linked to major thefts, and he was also a constant partner of Charles's brother Marco in previous operations. The police were completely certain that Alimo was one of the main planners of the operation. As for Moise, who is considered one of the most mysterious and threatening figures, he became a legend in the world of crime after his escape from Carandiru prison in the year 2001. Together with a group of other prisoners, he was the one who planned the massive escape operation through an underground tunnel, through which 53 prisoners managed to escape. Moise was an expert in tunnel digging. He did not stop there. In the year 2004, his name was mentioned again in police circles after the bank robbery in São Paulo, the operation we mentioned earlier. Moyes had participated in a bank robbery, and in fact, he was the one who gathered the new gang to rob the central bank in Fortaleza. Most of the gang members were chosen very carefully based on his extensive experience in the world of thefts and tunnel navigation. Moyes is also responsible for coordinating between the gang members, which the police discovered later. Although Moyes was one of the main suspects from the beginning, the police had compiled a long list of suspects and a lot of evidence. So the next step for the police, monitoring these suspects, because their main goal was not only to catch the thieves, but also to recover the stolen money before it disappears forever. The punishment for theft in Brazil was not severe or harsh, so if the thieves were caught, they would spend a few years in prison and then get out to enjoy their lives with the money they stole. Therefore, the police's goal was not only to catch the thieves, but also to recover the stolen money. One of the leads the police followed was the phone number when they searched the house as mentioned earlier. The house was in complete disarray with scattered papers and various items. After a long search, one of the officers found a SIM card, and this discovery was a turning point in the investigation, as the number was traced in cooperation with the telecommunications company. Based on this assistance, they were able to identify the owner of the phone number. They began tapping the outgoing and incoming calls between the gang members. This is one of the recordings they obtained. This recording shows that the thieves were still very cautious about using the money they stole so as not to arouse suspicion or leave any evidence that might reveal their location. The owner of the phone number was Antonio Edemar, who is also a gangster with a long criminal record. Therefore, the police did not know the area where he lived. They did not know his exact location, but they knew the area where he might have been hiding. It was Bofia Gym. The crowded area full of narrow alleys is where many criminals hide. However, locating him within that area was complicated. They needed additional evidence and precise information about his current whereabouts. Meanwhile, a group of federal police officers was following Antonio's file and comparing the information they had gathered. With his movement record, they managed to tap another call of his. This call was very strange, as Antonio asked a woman to help him buy a large number of rubber bands that they were using to tie bundles of money. The police assumed they were counting the money they stole, dividing it into equal bundles, and tying them with rubber bands. Or maybe they were about to try to dispose of it or hide it. At the same time, another team of officers continued to monitor Antonio's movements through location tracking technologies until they were able to pinpoint his location, revealing that he was in this red house located in the same area we mentioned earlier in Wafia Gym. The officers disguised as civilians sat in a cafe in front of the house and began monitoring the house from a distance. After a while, two men came out of the house, and the officers sitting in the cafe noticed that one of these men was staring at them suspiciously. And when the two men started casting suspicious and doubtful looks at the officers, the undercover policemen felt they had been exposed. So they immediately decided to reveal their identities. They drew their weapons and ordered the two men to lie on the ground. Soon after, Reinforcements arrived and the police forces surrounded the house from all directions. The officers stormed the house and arrested everyone inside. The police discovered a huge amount of stolen money. It was spread in every corner inside the house. Money was everywhere beside the walls, in bags, in backpacks, and even in a hole in the ground filled with carefully hidden bags. The surprises kept increasing with each discovery. In total, they found more than 12 million rials distributed in a way that seemed to represent a share for each member of the gang. The police arrested Antonio and everyone found inside the house, and a man named David was also arrested, who is actually Antonio's boss and one of the main executors of most of the operation, as well as responsible for distributing the members' shares. And he writes the amounts in the notebook, which proves the strength of his influence. These were the two main people the police arrested in the house. The investigations continued and expanded further after the arrest of Antonio and David, as 3 other people were arrested even though they were not directly involved in the central bank robbery. These individuals were merely followers of David and worked under his command. During the investigations with them, the police were able to find new leads pointing to other suspects. Each group of police officers was working on one of these intertwined leads. Each time a person was arrested, a new set of secrets was revealed, making the case more complicated with every moment. One of the important gang members who was arrested is named Dismar, who confessed that he bribed a bank guard, his close friend named Edilson, who helped them learn all the information about the security system in the bank vault, thus enabling them to avoid all cameras and motion sensors, and also informed them about the lever and the narrow passage between the wall and the money boxes. They had all the details we mentioned earlier, thanks to this guard, who paved the way for them to carry out this theft and access the money easily. The police's suspicion was justified after they previously anticipated an inside betrayal, but the thieves' confession that they had an accomplice, a reliable source from inside the bank itself, showed that their suspicions were justified. While the police were following another lead, a new member of the gang named Raimundo Lorindo appeared. The police were monitoring his calls with his girlfriend, even though he was extremely cautious in his communications, using public phones instead of his personal phone. Thanks to tracking the calls, the police were able to locate him. They were sure he was one of the gang members, so they continued to monitor him for a long time. 10 months after the central bank robbery, Raimondo traveled to another city called Portola. The police tracked his movements from the moment he arrived at the airport. Then he met with another person named Alessandro, whom the police believed to be part of the network. After Alessandro arrived home with his friend Raimondo, the police continued to intensify their surveillance. Shortly after, 3 other men entered the house, and then more people arrived at intervals. The investigators realized that these people were planning something due to the precise organization of their entry into the house. As soon as Alessandro left the house, the police followed his movements until he reached the bus station, where a group of people was waiting for him. And moments later, the group got into a pickup truck with him. This is what the police documented through a photo they took of them. The investigators discovered that the group was preparing to dig a new tunnel inside the building it purchased. Through a detailed study of the area, it became clear that there is a large bank there called Van Riesel, located close to the suspicious building. This bank contains many large vaults deep underground, and it is the new target for this gang. The police realized that the gang planning to rob the Van Riesel bank was not the same one that carried out the central bank robbery. But there are some members common to both gangs. These members are considered the bridge that led investigators to discover the new gang. And despite the lack of any concrete evidence proving the gang's intentions and activities inside the building, the police decided to take secret measures to monitor the gang's movements. So they secretly hired a building adjacent to the one occupied by the gang to closely monitor their movements. The building was equipped with advanced surveillance cameras and recording devices, providing the investigators with a comprehensive and multi-angled view of the gang's building. Thus, the police began collecting precise evidence that would reveal what they were planning. The gang members pretended to be workers renovating the building. They wore work clothes and safety helmets to avoid arousing suspicion. The police noticed that they were taking out a huge amount of waste, which made them realize that this waste was sand and clay extracted from the digging. It was a critical moment because it raised ominous questions among the investigators about who this extortionist was. Is he just an individual, or part of a larger network whose details they still do not know? Therefore, they decided to intensify their surveillance on them, while the police monitored the calls. They discovered that the blackmailer was regularly communicating with the gang members and demanding a share of the loot in exchange for keeping the operation secret and not exposing it. At this moment, the investigators felt very concerned because they did not know who this extortionist was and whether he was part of a larger network that might reveal their identities. The concerns were significant, especially with the gang nearing the basement of the bank, so they had to make a quick decision on how to handle this new threat. This was not the only threat they were facing. The investigation began to uncover a complex network of corruption within the police ranks, including some individuals who were involved in the central bank robbery. The corrupt officers who were extorting the gang for a share of the loot were arrested. It was a crucial moment in the investigations, as the police managed to arrest many criminals who were about to commit a new crime, thereby saving the bank from being robbed. Through the raid, the investigators succeeded in recovering the necessary evidence confirming the involvement of these individuals in their attempts to rob another bank. The large and complex network operating behind the scenes was also discovered, where they managed to arrest most of the gang members and thwart their criminal plans. At that moment, when the investigators arrived at the digging site, they found the tunnel secretly dug by the gang covered with a large wooden board. And when it was opened, it revealed a narrow passage supported by wooden and steel beams. After a thorough examination by experts, they confirmed that the method of digging this tunnel was exactly the same as the method used in the central bank tunnel. On the honest head end, and when the police stormed the tunnel, they discovered that the thieves had already dug about 78 meters, and they only had 12 meters left to reach the Van Rissel Bank vault. Among the gang members who were arrested, there were only 2 people the police confirmed were linked to the gang that carried out the central bank robbery: Raymond and his friend Alessandro the Fat. And 2 years after the central bank robbery, specifically in the year 2007, some suspects were still unknown, but the police continued to search for them. The police continued the investigation in the usual way by monitoring the criminals and their family members, tapping their phone calls, or using other similar espionage methods, as the moments of arresting some of these suspects were very dramatic. For example, when they managed to arrest Jose Marilotto, one of the main suspects, Jose Marliotto was found hiding behind a large beard, which made it difficult to recognize him at first. The investigators could not identify him, but they recognized him later after seeing his wife. One of the police officers approached him and whispered in his ear, saying, "We are the federal police. The game is over." Imagine he fainted as soon as he heard the words "federal police." When he came to, he found himself handcuffed, and the police were filming him. At that moment, Jose said, "It's strange to say that the past 2 years were the worst years of my life, even though I was a millionaire." He was expressing his feelings in a state of tension and anxiety, to the extent that he asked the police to imprison him. He preferred that because he believed it would be better for him. He was ready to leave his bad past behind and start a new phase of his life. Then, the police asked him to lead them to the money he had. Indeed, he led them to the location of his secret hideout and pulled out 2 bags from underground. The first contained money, while the second contained documents proving his ownership of several properties he had purchased. The police confiscated everything: the money, the properties, and the assets, to the extent that the police chief claimed they were sure this man had become as poor as he was before the theft. In 2007, another suspect named Limo, who is considered one of the main figures in the central bank robbery, was also arrested. The police found him with long hair and a thick beard as he tried to hide his features by changing his appearance, but his attempts failed. He also possesses several fake identities. When the police were initially monitoring him, they were not completely sure it was him due to the change in his appearance. But eventually, they were able to identify him thanks to a tattoo engraved on his right arm, which proved he was the same wanted person. He was arrested, and the charges against him were confirmed, and all the money, properties, and real estate in his possession were confiscated. And at the beginning of the year 2008, investigators continued to search for Paulo Sergio, a fake name registered in the Ministry of Commerce documents for the homeowner. He used this alias in his attempts to disappear. And then the police discovered that his real name is Belo Horizonte, the man wearing a beanie hat. The police managed to trace his movements to a car rental company. As he was leaving the company building, they approached him and told him that they were police officers and that he was under arrest. His reaction was strange and unexpected. He refused to believe them because they were wearing civilian clothes even after they showed him their official badges. Despite that, he didn't believe them and kept shouting that they were kidnapping him. The police responded that they were arresting him. He kept resisting until they took him to the police station by force. During the investigations, the police asked him how he obtained the identity card. He replied that he was the one who forged it. After that, he explained the reason for his reaction. He said he had already been kidnapped twice because of the central bank robbery, and the kidnappers disguised themselves as police and forced him to pay money, so he had to pay them for his release. And he added that on one occasion, he was shot during the kidnapping. Through the investigations, it was revealed that the central bank robbers were pursued by other gangs, as everyone was after them for their money. These chases were repeated with many gang members, and a prominent example of this is Marl Udo, who spent many years hiding in the forests, fleeing from other gangs. The other suspect who fell into the same predicament we mentioned earlier is Moises, the man who escaped from prison with 53 inmates. Moises was an expert in tunnel digging and participated in the São Paulo bank robbery before the central bank heist. Based on what many of the captured criminals mentioned, it turned out that Moises was the one who recruited them, which means he gathered most of the gang members, so he was considered the unofficial leader of the operation. The police were focusing on him specifically, but Moises is a clever criminal who knows how to remain on the run for a long time. The police were unable to arrest him until the year 2009. After 4 years from the central bank robbery, the police finally managed to track Moises through his wife, as they were listening to her calls and learned that on some weekends she would take her son to visit his father Moises so he could see him. The police tracked his location and discovered that he was hiding in one of the buildings in São Paulo, as shown in this picture. The police knew his car, and before arresting him, they first made sure that his car was parked in an underground garage. To prevent Moises from causing any chaos or attempting to escape, the police decided to execute a clever trick by contacting the building's guard and asking him to call Moises and tell him that one of the building's residents, while leaving the garage, accidentally hit his car and he needs to come to check the damage. Indeed, Moises came down, and at the same time, the police were monitoring him through the surveillance cameras in the building. He left his apartment, took the elevator, and went down without having the slightest idea of what awaited him. As soon as he reached the basement and opened the elevator doors, he was surprised by the large number of federal police officers in front of him. He looked at them in shock, and the police immediately informed him that he was under arrest. And thus, one of the main planners of the central bank robbery was caught. Moises said to the police in shock, "I thought you had forgotten me." 4 years have passed since the bank heist. But one of the officers replied, saying, "We haven't forgotten you." The police knew that Moises was one of the main planners of the operation. There is also another person, Limo, whom we mentioned earlier, who changed his appearance to try to hide. As for the third person in the operation, he was called Fernandinho. He is a man known in São Paulo as one of the biggest drug dealers in the city, based on the research conducted by the police. I have received information indicating that he was the one who provided the necessary funds to finance the bank robbery. Such operations required a significant investment, including renting houses, registering artificial grass companies, drilling tools, food for gang members, and cars, trucks, and fuel. All these things needed money, so Fernandinho paid 3 million reals to fund the operation. According to the information obtained by the police, his share of the stolen money was the largest among them, as he took 15% of the total amount, which was 164 million reals. This means his share amounted to about 25 million reals. In the world of gangs, as is known, anyone who suddenly gets a large sum of money becomes a target. Imagine that Fernandinho was kidnapped twice, and those who kidnapped him were dressed as police officers. It was not known whether the kidnappers were disguised or corrupt police officers, but after the kidnapping, they demanded a ransom of 1 million reals. The family paid the ransom, but the kidnappers, they did not release Fernandinho until the police found him dead. He was later killed. The police were able to identify the kidnappers, and it turned out they were corrupt police officers. According to the investigations, these corrupt officers and Fernandinho knew each other before. When they kidnapped him and took the ransom, they decided to kill him because they were sure that if they released him, he would take revenge on them, putting their lives in danger. They killed Fernandinho along with several other people who knew their secrets, with the aim of eliminating all evidence that might lead the police to them. Fernandinho was not the only gang member who was kidnapped for ransom. Most of the criminals involved in the central bank robbery were pursued by the police, other criminals, and corrupt police. They wished they had been arrested instead of being chased by all these people. For example, one of the gang members named Pedro was at his home. Suddenly, he found a group of people at his door disguised as police officers. They asked him to hand over the money he had stolen. While he was trying to understand what was happening, they broke into his house, beat him and his family, and stole all the money in his house, which exceeded 1 million reals. In the end, Pedro turned himself in. The robbery of the central bank in Fortaleza was one of the craziest cases Brazil has witnessed. Its impact was not limited to the theft of a huge amount of money, but it also extended to many other effects that left their mark on many people. The incident caused a series of issues and crimes, including kidnapping, extortion, and so on. Moreover, it led many gangs to turn to this type of criminal operation as bank robberies through underground tunnels became common. The police discovered dozens of tunnels annually, and some operations were thwarted before they were carried out, while others were executed. In the end, the case was completely solved, and they uncovered the criminal network and arrested most of its members. Of course, some of them had died. However, there is only one person who remained at large, and the police have not been able to catch him to this day. He is called Jovi Hall, the only person who managed to escape and whose name remained etched in the minds of the investigators. As for the others, those remaining were arrested. Regarding the stolen amounts, the police managed to recover about 34 million reals of the stolen money. It is only a small part of the amount, but they were unable to recover more, as the gangs laundered a lot of money and bought real estate and properties at cheap prices just to launder money, not to mention the money paid as a ransom to free themselves. And since the penalty for theft in Brazil is not severe, the court convicted them of money laundering, which is more serious than theft, with most of them being sentenced to life imprisonment. The court also seized all the properties they purchased, whether real estate, cars, or anything else.
And you, dear viewer, share your opinion with us in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to our channel to receive all the latest updates.